Okay, in this short lesson, we're going to go ahead and talk about how we can edit points and then how we can use the different snap tools over here to snap points to specific geometry or the grid or other things like that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and we're just going to use a grid. So on my shelf here, I'm going to go ahead and hit Control, hold Control, left click Grid to lay down a grid. And I'm going to go ahead and dive into my node here to the geometry level. So I'm going to go ahead and select my select tool, and I want my points selection mode to be available so I can select points. And when you're talking about snapping, points are the most common pieces of geometry that you're going to use to snap. So before we get to that, there's ways that we can edit either a single point or a group of points if we need to transform them, translate, rotate, scale, any of that, instead of doing the geometry as a whole. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and just box select this bottom right point, and I'm going to go ahead and hit the T key. Okay, so the T key is keyboard shortcut for translate, and there's R for rotate, and there is I believe it is S for scale. Oh, I'm sorry, E for scale. But if you look over here in the geometry network, you can see that it laid down this edit node under my grid. Okay, and this edit node allows us to edit whatever specific piece of geometry that we laid down. And if you take a look up here in the parameters window, you can see that in my group input here I have 99. Okay, and to see what that is, that's my actual point number. Okay, and remember we looked at the geometry spreadsheet, we looked at all the different point numbers, but if I want to see them in the viewport, I have some geometry visualizer tools over here on the right side. Okay, so over here, if I go ahead, this point, if I hover over, I can display points if I need to display points. And then down here, there's this point with a number. If I click that, we can see all the different point numbers on my grid here, okay? And we can see that this is indeed 0.99. So if I need to see my point numbers, so I can, maybe select a specific point number or see what point numbers I'm selecting, so maybe I need to input them in my group or something like that, I can turn this visualizer on and I can see that. Same thing for prims, I can visualize that stuff as well. So we'll take a look at more of this stuff throughout the course, but I just want to show you that. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this off. So it's group 99, so point number 99, group type points, and it guessed it obviously from what we selected, the different pieces of geometry here. And then down here on the edit tab, transform, we have that familiar translate, rotate, scale option. Okay, so I can come down here in my viewport if I want. I can do the value ladder if I wanted to, or I could come down here and just move this, move my gnomons as well here. Okay, so I can move that specific point. Okay, now say I want to snap that point to a specific area in my grid. Okay, instead of just kind of eyeballing it or I'm trying to figure out where I want to put this point. Maybe I want to snap it to a certain unit, a certain grid unit. So I can come over here to my snap tools, and this first one that looks like a magnet and like the grid underneath, if I click that, now I'm snapping the grid. And again, you can kind of hover over these to see exactly what these do. Okay, so now with that selected, if I go ahead and move an X, you can see I get a template of different points on my grid, and I can go ahead and snap it to specific points on that grid. Okay, so it'll go to that exact point on the grid. Okay, so same thing with Y. I can do that as well if I want to snap it to a specific point on the grid. Okay, so that's how we can do the grid snapping. Another way we could do that is down here is the point snapping. So if I select that, and again, if I start moving this around, or I can select the middle, and I can select this, and you can see that I start getting some template points on my grid. So if I want to snap it maybe to this point, I can snap it to a specific point on my current geometry or other pieces of geometry that I might have in my scene. So I can do that with that point snapping option. Here we can snap to a curve. So if we had a curve laying down, I could snap geometry to that. And then here is multi-snapping. So if I left click, hold this down, I have options to either snap it to the grid or snap it to a point, kind of all in one here. But I kind of like using the individual tools so I know exactly what I'm snapping to and where I'm snapping. So so that's how we can snap pieces of geometry, and also how we can go ahead and edit points with that edit node. And again, this is non-destructive, so if I don't like what I have here, I can always select it, delete, and it will go back to what I had. All right, in the next video, we're going to start looking at how we can actually select and edit other pieces of geometry on objects, and then we'll start looking at different tools on how we can actually manipulate pieces of geometry. So you know, while this is not a modeling course, we're not modeling geometry, all these tools that I'm showing help to maybe possibly drive animations or effects later on down the line, or build up maybe some test geometry that we want to test for effects or animation. We can kind of put some rough geometry together. So you got to think that way in Houdini. Just because, you know, a tool is maybe something like a snapping tool or a transform tool, or maybe a piece of geometry tool that might be used to modify or build a piece of geometry. It's not used just for that. You can use that for any other thing in Houdini, which makes Houdini great because we can use it to drive other aspects in the program. Okay, so we'll take a look at some of that stuff in the next few lessons.